My name is Emma. I'm 58 years old, and I was married to the same man for 31 years. He never once touched me. Not a kiss, not a hug, not even a gentle hand on my shoulder. For decades, I thought it was my fault. Maybe I wasn't pretty enough. Maybe I wasn't lovable, but then, one rainy afternoon, I climbed into the attic. I was just looking for an old photo box. Instead, I found something that shattered everything I thought I knew about my marriage. The man I loved had lived a second life I never saw coming, and now I'm telling my story. Not for revenge, but for every woman who's ever felt invisible inside her own home. If you've ever questioned your worth, or wondered why someone you love pulled away, you're not alone. Before we dive deeper, take a moment to subscribe. So if you ever need to pause and come back later, you won't miss the rest of this story, or the others just like it now. Let me ask you, what would you do if the person you trusted most had been hiding a second life all along? I met Andrew at a 4th of July potluck in 1989. He brought a half-burnt cherry pie and no utensils, but he had the kindest eyes I'd ever seen. Blue, but not cold. The kind of blue that made you feel like you could trust him with your secrets. I was 22. He was 20. We both laughed too loud at a joke about canned tuna, and somehow that was the beginning. We married 5 years later in a small church on the edge of town. Just 20 people. No band. I walked down the aisle to the sound of birds singing outside the stained glass windows. I thought, this is it. The man who will hold me every night. Grow old with me. Tell me I'm beautiful even when my hair turns gray. But the first night after the wedding, he didn't touch me. He smiled, said he was tired, kissed my forehead like a brother would, and turned off the light. I didn't think much of it. Maybe he was just nervous, or respectful. But the second night, and the third, and every night after that, it was the same dot. He never reached for me, never pulled me close in the kitchen, never brushed my hair out of my face, even when the wind made me look like a scarecrow. I tried to be understanding. I asked gently, "Are you okay?" He always said, "Of course, I love you." Then he'd change the subject, usually to taxes, or what brand of peanut butter was on sale. I remember one night, maybe a year in, I stood in the bathroom staring at myself in the mirror. I was holding a candle. Don't ask me why. It just felt cinematic. Like if I stared long enough, I'd find the answer in my own reflection. I whispered, "Is it me?" That night, I wore the red dress he said he liked. I even curled my hair, which for me is a whole production involving 3 hot rollers and a prayer. He looked at me and said, "You look nice." Then asked if I'd seen the weather forecast. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because if I didn't, I might cry. So I laughed and made us spaghetti. We lived like that for 31 years. Neighbors thought we were perfect. People called us the steady ones. Rock solid, they'd say. They didn't see the separate beds, the separate birthdays, the quiet dinners, where the loudest sound was the clink of a fork on ceramic. One Christmas, my niece asked me, "Auntie Emma, how come you never had babies?" I smiled and said, "Well, sweetie, I guess Santa forgot to bring us one." She giggled. Andrew just sipped his wine. I spent years telling myself this was normal, that maybe passion fades, that maybe some marriages are more companionship than connection, that maybe I was asking for too much, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. Still, I stayed. Because he wasn't cruel. He never raised his voice. He paid the bills. He mowed the lawn. He was present, but never with me. And after a while, I stopped hoping. I started gardening, knitting, listening to true crime podcasts. Funny how you find comfort in stories where the bad guy is obvious. At least murderers don't pretend to love you for 3 decades sometimes. I imagined packing a bag and leaving. But where would I go? What would I tell people? "Hi, I'm leaving my husband because he's too polite." So I stayed, made casseroles, wrote thank you cards, smiled at church, but inside, I was vanishing. Looking back now, I wonder how many women smiled through silence. How many of us felt like wallpaper in our own lives, pretty but ignored. If this story already speaks to you, take a second to subscribe. Not just so you can come back later, but because the stories we tell each other might just be the stories that save us. Now, I didn't know it then, but everything I believed about my husband, every ounce of loyalty I gave him was about to be tested, and it all started the day I went looking for an old photo album and climbed into the attic. I never meant to open the attic. It had always been Andrew's space. He called it storage, but the truth is I'd never been allowed up there. There was a padlock on the door, a shiny silver one, too polished for a room full of old boxes once. Maybe 15 years ago, I asked him what he kept up there. He said, "Just tools and junk. Love? You'd hate it. Too dusty." Then he kissed my forehead. That same brotherly kiss that had become our ritual, but last March, he slipped. Literally, he was changing a light bulb in the hallway and fell from the step stool, sprained his wrist, refused to go to the doctor, of course. Doctors make you sicker, he said, as he wrapped an ice pack in a dish towel. The next morning, I was doing laundry. His jacket was draped over the chair. When I picked it up, something metal clinked to the floor. It was the attic key. I don't know what came over me. Curiosity, resentment, loneliness that had festered for years. I stared at that key like it was glowing, like it was whispering, "Go." And I did. The door creaked like something out of a haunted movie. Dust particles danced in the sunlight like tiny ghosts. The air smelled like cedar and old books. There were boxes, dozens of them, all neatly labeled in Andrew's handwriting. One said taxes, 1994. Another, manuals do not toss. I opened a few boring stuff. Receipts, power cords, screws in mismatched jars. But then, I found a wooden chest. No label. Just sitting in the far corner under a faded quilt. It wasn't locked. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were photos. Stacks of them. Not of us. Not of family. Just one man. Over and over again, young, dark-haired, always smiling. Sometimes on a bike, sometimes holding a book, sometimes with Andrew. Laughing, I didn't recognize the man, but I recognized Andrew's face. It was the way he used to look at me, before the silence. Before the walls went up, there were letters, too, folded neatly, yellowed with time. I shouldn't have read them, but I did. They were love letters. Dozens of them, each signed with a simple initial D. My heart thudded so loud I thought the floor would hear it. I miss the way you brewed coffee with too much sugar. I still sleep on the left side, hoping you'll come back. I wish. I could have stayed, but we both know your family would never understand. Each sentence was a knife. I sat on the attic floor for hours. My legs went numb, but I couldn't move, because everything I thought I knew was melting away. He had loved someone so deeply, so fully, and it wasn't me. The worst part, he looked happy in those pictures, happier than I'd ever seen him with me. I wasn't angry yet. Not then, just hollow. I climbed back down, put the key back in his coat pocket, and smiled when he asked me what was for dinner. "Meatloaf," I said. "Your favorite," he nodded. And I watched him eat it with the same quiet calm he always had, not knowing I had just met the man who stole his heart, and that I had never even known his name. Later that night, I sat in bed and stared at the ceiling. For 3 decades, I thought I was the problem, but maybe I was just the cover story. If you're still watching, go ahead and tap that subscribe button so you don't miss the rest of this story. And if you ever feel like something isn't quite right in your life, trust that feeling, because the attic didn't just hold old boxes. It held the truth. I couldn't sleep, not after what I saw in the attic. I kept hearing that man's name in my head, even though I didn't know it yet. Just the letter D. I needed answers. And I knew just the person who might have them. Richard, Andrew's best friend since high school. The man who gave a toast at our wedding and called me the luckiest gal in town. I hadn't seen him in years. Not since his wife passed, but I still had his number written in fading ink on the back of our old phone book. Yes, I still use a phone book. Don't judge. At least it doesn't crash when the Wi-Fi's down. I called him the next morning. He answered on the second ring. His voice hadn't changed. Warm, steady, full of old stories. I told him I found something personal, and I needed to ask him about Andrew's past. There was a pause. Then he said, "You should come." His house was just 10 minutes away, but the drive felt like crossing into another life. He greeted me with a hug that smelled like aftershave and cinnamon, then poured me a cup of coffee that could have doubled as motor oil. We sat in his living room, surrounded by photos of fishing trips and faded sports memorabilia. He didn't ask questions, he just waited. So I told him about the attic. The photos, the letters, the man with the dark hair and the smile that lived in Andrew's memories. Richard listened, eyes soft, mouth tight. When I finished, he exhaled slowly and said, his name was Daniel. Daniel. Finally, the letter D had a name. And suddenly, he felt real. Richard leaned forward, elbows on knees. They met in college. Roommates at first, but it was more than that. You could see it if you knew what to look for. I asked him why Andrew never told me. He looked at me, really looked at me, and said, because he was terrified. Not of you, of what his family would do. Apparently, Andrew had tried to come out once. Just once. He was 19. His father told him he'd burn in hell. His mother slapped him. His brother didn't speak to him for 5 years, so he buried it. All of it. And when Daniel's family moved away, Andrew was too afraid to follow. He met me 6 months later. He liked you, Richard said. He really did, but he was broken, and no one told him he could be both broken and loved. That hit me hard, because I had spent years trying to fix him, with kindness, with casseroles, with silence. But maybe he didn't need fixing. Maybe. He just needed freedom. Richard reached into a drawer and pulled out a photo. It was the three of them, Richard, Andrew, and Daniel, taken on a hiking trip in 1985, all smiling, all sunburned. Andrew looked alive. That was the only word for it. Not the quiet man who folded towels with military precision. Not the polite stranger I shared a bed with, but someone real, laughing, unburdened. I took the photo home, not to hurt, but to remember that he had lived even if I wasn't part of that life. That night, I sat on the porch with a blanket and a glass of wine. The stars were out, the same ones Andrew used to name when we were young. I thought about how much we never say, how much we lock away, and how easy it is to miss the truth when we're too polite to ask for it. I'm not angry at him. Not anymore, but I am grieving. Not just for what we didn't have, but for the life he could have lived. If the world had been kinder, if this story touches something deep in you, please consider subscribing so you won't miss what comes next, or the stories we haven't told yet. Because sometimes, it's not the secrets that hurt the most, it's the silence. I couldn't stop thinking about Daniel, his smile, his letters, his ghost, still lingering in the attic. But more than that, I couldn't stop thinking about Andrew. Not the Andrew the first married. Not the man who folded socks like origami and vacuumed in straight lines, but the Andrew from that photo, grinning under a pine tree, sun in his eyes, heart wide open. I kept wondering, had I ever really known him, or had I just lived beside him? The next week I went back up to the attic. I told myself I was looking for more photos, but the truth is I was chasing answers. This time I opened every box, one by one. Old tax returns, college notebooks filled with doodles, a broken wristwatch, birthday cards from people I'd never met. And then, at the bottom of a box labeled junk, I found a leather journal. Black cover, no title, no name. I recognized the handwriting right away. Sharp, precise, Andrews. I didn't hesitate. The first entry was dated May 3rd, 1995. Just 2 months after our wedding, he wrote. She looked beautiful today, but when I touched her hand, I felt guilt instead of warmth. My chest tightened. I kept reading. I thought maybe marriage would change something, that I could reset the part of me that still aches for him, but it hasn't. I am trying. God knows. I am trying. Page after page, he poured himself out. Private thoughts, lonely nights, sleepless guilt. He wrote about Daniel, the way his laugh still echoed in Andrew's ears, the way he hated himself for loving someone the world wouldn't let him have. But then came something worse. He wrote about me, not in cruelty, but in regret. I wish I could love her the way she deserves. She's kind, gentle. She hums while she cooks. She deserves a husband who reaches for her. And all I do is retreat. Tears blurred the ink. He wasn't angry. He wasn't cold. He was trapped by expectations, by his family, by the world, and by me unintentionally. Later in the journal, around year 10 of our marriage, he wrote about his mother, how she found out about Daniel, how she threatened to cut him out of the will, to disown him, to shame him in front of the church. He wrote, she said if I ever humiliated the family, I'd be dead to her. And I believed her. That's why he stayed. Not for love. Not even for comfort, but for legacy, for image, for silence. Our marriage wasn't a love story. It was a carefully constructed performance. He wasn't holding back affection. He was holding back his truth. There was one entry I couldn't forget. It was short. Just 7 words. I want to die, but I can't. I read that sentence over and over again, and suddenly I saw everything differently. The quiet, the distance, the perfectly ironed shirts, the routine. It wasn't just habit. It was survival. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold. The journal lay open beside me, and I whispered, I'm sorry. Not because I had done something wrong, but because neither of us had been free. If you're still listening, thank you. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. Not for me, but because stories like this, stories that hide in shadows, deserve to be heard. Before I closed the journal, I noticed a small envelope tucked into the back pocket. Inside was a photo. Andrew and Daniel, together, smiling, holding hands. It was the only photo I'd seen where Andrew looked whole. That image burned into me, not in anger, not in jealousy, but in mourning, because I realized I hadn't just lost a husband. I had lost the truth of the man I thought I knew. And once you lose the truth, you can't go back. I thought I'd wait. Let it sit. Let the storm pass quietly in my chest. But after reading his journal, after seeing the photo, after knowing the truth, I couldn't carry it alone anymore, so I waited for Andrew to come home. He was always home by 5. Like clockwork, he hated being late for dinner, even if dinner was just leftover meatloaf and a side of awkward silence. That evening, I made tea. his favorite chamomile with a splash of honey. I set the mugs on the table, placed the journal beside them, and waited. When he walked in, I could tell something had shifted, not in him. In me, I had spent years shrinking, years softening my voice, making myself small so he wouldn't pull further away. But not tonight. He sat down, glanced at the journal, and froze. "What's this?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "I went into the attic," I said. "I found the letters, the pictures, your words." He didn't speak. His face didn't change, but his hands began to shake. I didn't accuse him. I didn't yell. I just looked at him and asked, "Why didn't you tell me?" His eyes filled with tears. Real ones. The kind that catch in your throat before they fall. "Because I was ashamed," he said. We sat in silence for a long time, just the sound of the old wall clock ticking between us. Then he said, "I thought if I buried it deep enough, if I lived right, paid the bills, showed up, acted the part, it would go away. That maybe God would forgive me for feeling what I felt." He looked older than I'd ever seen him, not just in his face, but in his spirit. Like a man who'd been carrying a weight for so long, he forgot what it felt like to stand tall. I asked him, "Did you ever love me?" He didn't hesitate. "I loved your kindness, your laughter, your heart. But I wasn't in love with you, and you knew that, didn't you?" That broke me because he was right. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped expecting passion, stopped expecting warmth, and started accepting crumbs. He reached across the table, a gesture so rare it startled me. "I'm sorry," he said, "for all of it." I looked at this man who had shared my home, my birthdays, my quiet Sunday mornings, and I realized we were both victims of silence. He hadn't meant to hurt me. He had only wanted to survive, and I had only wanted to be enough. There was a moment, just a moment, when we both cried. Not for what we lost, but for what was never given the chance to be real. I said to him, "I don't hate you, but I can't keep pretending. Not for you, not for anyone." He nodded, and that small nod, as simple as it was the bravest thing he'd ever given me. I stood up, walked over, and hugged him. It was the first time in years I had touched him with intention, and maybe the last. That night, I slept in the guest room. Not out of anger, but because I needed space to finally hear myself think. If you've ever felt invisible in your own life, if you've stayed quiet just to keep the peace, please consider subscribing. Not because this story is over, but because stories like this are everywhere, and silence doesn't heal anything. The next morning, Andrew made me coffee. Extra sugar, just how I like it. He didn't say much, but he smiled, and for the first time, it felt real. Not romantic, not forced. Just two people. Finally, honest. We didn't talk about divorce. Not yet, but we talked. And that, after 31 years of quiet, was everything. A week after the journal came to light, Andrew's family invited us over for Sunday dinner. They hadn't done that in years, but I think somehow they sensed something had shifted. Or maybe they just wanted to make sure we were still performing. I didn't want to go, but Andrew asked me to. "I want to stop hiding," he said. His voice shook when he said it, like a child asking permission to finally breathe. So I said yes, and we went. The house looked the same. White curtains, faded family portraits, the smell of roast chicken and judgment. His mother greeted us at the door. She kissed his cheek, told him he looked thin, then turned to me and said, "Emma dear, still wearing that same lipstick? So loyal to your choices?" I smiled. The kind of smile you practice in the mirror before court hearings. Dinner was tense. Not in the obvious way, in the way people say too little and chew too loudly. Halfway through the green bean casserole, Andrew cleared his throat. "There's something I need to say." You could hear forks pause midair. Even the gravy stopped steaming. "I'm done pretending," he said. "I've spent most of my life hiding who I am, and I'm tired." His mother froze. His brother looked at his plate. His sister blinked. Like someone turned off the subtitles. "I loved someone," Andrew continued. "Before Emma, his name was Daniel." The room fell into that sharp kind of silence, the kind that makes you hear your own heartbeat. His mother's hand trembled slightly as she set down her glass. Then she said, "We thought you'd grown out of that phase. That phase." Like, Daniel was a pair of ripped jeans. I didn't plan to speak, but something inside me stood up. Literally, I rose from my chair, napkin in hand, heart pounding. "With all due respect," I said, "this phase you're referring to, it was the love of his life. The one he was forced to bury so he could sit at this table and be tolerated by people who never truly saw him." She narrowed her eyes. "We welcomed you into this family, Emma. We treated you like a daughter." I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Yes. But you treated your own son like a sin." No one moved. Andrew stared at me, not with fear, but with relief. His sister finally spoke quietly. "I always wondered why he never looked happy. And just like that, the air cracked open. His brother, stoic and quiet, stood up and left the room. His mother didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just stared at her hands, like maybe she could scrub the guilt off with a napkin. Later, in the car, Andrew held my hand, truly held it warm. Firm, present. "You didn't have to defend me," he said. I answered, "I didn't do it for you. I did it for the boy you were, the one no one protected." We didn't speak the rest of the drive, but it wasn't a heavy silence. It was a sacred one. That night, I wrote in my own journal. I wrote, "Today, I watched a man take his first breath at 58 years old." If this chapter in our story resonates with you, please consider subscribing. Not because this tale is over, but because every quiet heart deserves to be heard. Sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is speak truth at a table where silence has been the main course for years. And sometimes, the most radical form of love is telling the truth out loud. 2 weeks later, Andrew packed his suitcase. He didn't say much. Didn't need to. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was honest. We had talked, cried, laughed, even and now. We were saying goodbye. He asked if he should be the one to leave. I nodded, not because I hated him, not because I needed revenge, but because this house, our quiet, aging home, had been my prison, too, and I needed to walk through it without seeing ghosts in every chair. On the morning he left, I made coffee, 1 mug, for me. I watched him fold his shirts, just the way he liked, perfect lines, corners sharp. "Emma," he said, pausing at the door, "I never meant to waste your life." I looked at him and said, You just didn't know how to live yours." He smiled, a soft, crooked smile, then turned and walked down the driveway with the same suitcase we bought on our honeymoon, and just like that, I was alone. At first it was peaceful. The house breathed differently without him. More space, more quiet, more possibility. But the second night, I opened the fridge and saw the jar of strawberry jam he liked. I held it like it was something sacred, then burst into tears right there on the kitchen floor, because the truth is, you can grieve someone who's still alive, and sometimes it hurts even more. The next few days were odd. I wandered around the house like someone trying to remember what her own voice sounded like. I started reading books again. Books with messy love stories. Books where people made mistakes and said too much. I pulled weeds in the garden, chopped onions just to feel something at one point. I stood in front of the mirror and asked out loud, "Okay, Emma, who are you now?" The mirror didn't answer, but I saw something new in my reflection. Not happiness. Not yet, but space. One morning, I got a call from my sister. She asked how I was doing. I said, "I just spent 15 minutes talking to a spider on my windowsill." She laughed. "Did it answer?" I said. It nodded. "I think we're friends now." We both laughed. And for the first time in a while, it felt real. Loneliness is strange. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It whispers when you set the table for one. When you hear a song that used to be yours. When you roll over in bed and forget there's no one there. But I also started noticing things I'd missed. The way sunlight poured through the kitchen window at 9 a.m., the way the floor creaked differently when it was only my footsteps, the freedom of dancing badly in the living room with no one to judge your rhythm. I wasn't healed. Not yet, but I was becoming. And sometimes that's enough. If you're still watching, thank you. And if you've ever felt lost inside a life you built out of fear or habit, please consider subscribing. Not just for the next story, but so we can find our way forward together. I thought I'd feel angry, bitter, but I don't. I feel like someone who finally opened a window after 31 years in a sealed room, and the air, though cold and unfamiliar, tastes like truth. It's been 4 months since Andrew left. 4 months of silence, of learning, of undoing. I'm not the same woman I was in January, and I don't want to be. I wake up now without the weight on my chest. No need to tiptoe around someone else's sadness. No need to play the role of the good wife when the curtain already fell last week. While cleaning out the last drawer in the attic, I found something I hadn't seen before. It was taped to the bottom of the chest, an envelope yellowed. Fragile on the front, it simply read, "If you ever choose yourself." It was addressed to Andrew, but I didn't hesitate. Inside was a single letter. From Daniel, the last one he ever sent. His handwriting was still soft, elegant. I read it slowly. "I hope one day you'll live without fear. I hope you'll stop apologizing for love. And if that day comes, I hope you'll find this letter and know that even if I'm not there, I loved you freely, for both of us." I didn't cry. I just sat with it. Let it settle into me, like sunlight after a storm. I folded the letter gently, put it back in the envelope, and placed it in a wooden box beside my wedding ring. Some things are meant to be kept, not for the pain, but for the reminder that once someone dared to love in secret. I didn't tell Andrew about the letter. Not because he didn't deserve it, but because some closures are personal. That weekend, I took myself to the farmer's market alone. It was strange, walking among couples and families, holding my own basket, buying tulips just because they made me smile. I even flirted a little with the man selling sourdough. He had kind eyes and called me miss twice, which I'm choosing to take as a compliment and not an eyesight issue. Later that afternoon, I baked my first cake in years. It sank in the middle, tasted like baking soda, and I ate every bite. With pride, because I'm not trying to be perfect anymore, just present. There's a quiet kind of joy in choosing yourself after a lifetime of choosing everyone else. Some nights, I still feel lonely. Of course I do. I miss the sound of a second toothbrush, the rhythm of two people living in sync, even if that rhythm was offbeat. But now, I light a candle. I play the music I like. I dance in the kitchen without worrying if anyone's watching. And sometimes, I write not in a journal, but on sticky notes taped to the fridge. Little reminders like, you're allowed to start over, breathe, eat the cake. They're silly, but they're mine. If this story has meant something to you, please consider subscribing, because healing isn't always loud. Sometimes it sounds like the creak of a floorboard in a quiet house, finally filled with peace. I don't know what comes next. And for the first time in my life, that doesn't scare me, because starting over doesn't mean forgetting. It means honoring the truth while still choosing hope. So here I am, not broken, not bitter, just beginning. And maybe that's the most beautiful part of all. Some stories don't end with a grand gesture. They end with a quiet truth. Finally spoken aloud, Emma's story isn't just hers. It belongs to anyone who has ever traded their voice for acceptance. To those who stayed, not out of love, but out of fear. To those who forgot themselves while trying to keep someone else whole, and now she's beginning again, not with a new romance, but with a reclaimed self. The house is still the same. The kitchen, the garden, the old attic. But she is not the same. She chose herself. And that might be the most radical thing any of us can do. So let me ask you, have you ever stayed too long in a life that wasn't yours? What truth have you been too afraid to speak out loud? Tell us in the comments, because when you share your story, you give someone else permission to find their own voice too. And if this journey stirred something in you, please subscribe. Not just to follow what comes next, but to remind yourself that you're not alone. Not in your pain, not in your healing, not in your beginning again. And if you're ready, there's another story waiting for you right here on the channel. You never know. It might just be the one that unlocks your truth.